what we want to focus on today is first, how can we start to measure those results so that we can take those learnings into the future, but also how can we capitalize on those users who may have shopped around for your brand or in your category, but may have not gotten to that purchase date during the event, knowing that we're still in that holiday period, a high in purchase intent period, and a lot of brands are still running deals throughout the next couple of weeks as well. Again, appreciate you all jumping on today. Really want to take just a couple minutes here today to really dive into how using AMC brands can continue to drive results from the increase of shoppers that we saw during BFCM. We all know that we see a big influx of both not only purchases, but the amount of people that are viewing your PDP, are viewing your ads during that week of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And what we want to focus on today is first, how can we start to measure those results so that we can take those learnings into the future, but also how can we capitalize on those users who may have shopped around for your brand or in your category, but may have not gotten to that purchase date during the event, knowing that we're still in that holiday period, a high in purchase intent period, and a lot of brands are still running deals throughout the next couple of weeks as well.
Quick introduction, though. Kenton is product manager at Intentwise. I'm one of the founders here at Intentwise. Love all things AMC and been in the weeds working with AMC for quite some time. Also exploring some of the new data sets that have been made available by Amazon within AMC.
So just a quick overview of the agenda we'll walk through today. Again, first, we'll start with some different queries or metrics that we can start to look at here to understand the performance that we drove during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and then how can we then use that data to set us up for future events? And then how can we use audiences from AMC to help us continue to maximize the shoppers that we drove during the event period? Before we jump into that, though, I just want to kind of put a frame on some of the results that we're seeing out of BFCM so far and kind of use that as context as we move throughout this discussion today. Overarchingly, and this is some data that we pulled from Intentwise for over 250 different accounts, the main trends that we saw were an increase overall in spend throughout the main Turkey 5 days of about 15%, but a dip in conversion rate due to a number of factors, right? Prices potentially being higher and users not purchasing as much, users just, or shoppers just not being in as much of a purchase mindset, deals pushing a little bit earlier into the calendar, and maybe people bought earlier than they would have versus just buying during those main 5 days. So a couple of factors that led into that, but overall that led to a slight drop in specifically ad attributed sales compared to what we saw during BFCM last year.
I definitely heard more Turkey 5 being called Turkey 12 this year than I ever did before.
And I'm sure that made an impact as well, right? More sales being brought a little bit forward.
We are digging deeper into, rather than look at just Black Friday and Cyber Monday, if you looked a little bit further, does the story look the same? But we'll share those out as we learn more. But for right now, this is a broad headline story we have in terms of performance.
And I think the point here isn't to say that Black Friday was bad this year or anything like that. I think we still saw overarchingly strong results. But this drop that we see in conversion rate opens up an opportunity specifically, right? Because while even if users were pushed forward or things like that, we still saw an increase in exposure due to an increase in ad spend this year compared to years past. We didn't necessarily see large increases in costs or anything like that. Usually the total click-throughs of users is about the same. So that means that we have a larger set of users compared to years past where they've viewed your PDP during these event periods, but haven't yet made a purchase. And so I'd say that more opens up more opportunity for us in the holiday season than anything else. So I want to jump into some of the different queries that we can use to start to measure the results of what we saw during BFCM, really with the intent of driving, as we get into 2026, driving better results as we get to Prime Day, even BFCM next year, or in the more short term, driving results as we think about these next 2 weeks or so of the holiday season. So the first one that I want to focus on is called tentpole phase overlap. The idea of this query is to allow us to see the impact of users being exposed to different ad phases on their overall performance. Okay, so, say for an example, I saw an ad during just the event period, and then Srinath saw an ad during the lead up and the event period. We're going to be segmented into different buckets, and then based off of our return on ad spend, our conversion rate, we'll be able to segment the effect of, say, a lead-in ad on somebody's overall propensity to purchase from your brand.
The way we certainly on the Intentwise platform, the way we set up the ability to run this query is you can literally pick what your lead up dates need to be, or and what the event days need to be, and then what the lead out days need to be, and then you can run potentially multiple queries with different ranges depending on whatever you want to choose. So you could do that, but certainly this is the first thing. If you haven't already done this yet, this is the first thing we recommend you activate.
And the great thing, Srinath, you mentioned earlier that updated data that we're getting out of AMC, because AMC is now offering up to a 25-month look back compared to the 13 months prior, we can also now start to compare this to what did we see in 2024? What did we see? You can even start to get a glimpse of some of 2023 still if you pulled this within the next couple of days. So that opens up, maybe I spent a little bit more in the lead in this year than I did in years past, or maybe I spent less in the lead in than I did in years past. And I can kind of see the impact or result that I've had on my overall event day performance.
That's a good call out, actually. So one of the announcements at Unbox was that the traffic data in AMC can now goes back 25 months. There you go. So that's a change. Just keep that in mind if you haven't already caught it from Unboxed updates. And then it is just traffic data. Now the conversion data within your default AMC instance doesn't go that far back, but you do have the 5-year look back, which is a paid data set that is being made available as well. Just FYI.
We got a question in the chat here about the metrics that we had overall in the last slide. Those were pertaining specifically to the data that we've collected from Amazon, right? So I wouldn't use those as steadfast. This is what we saw across, D2C and retail and all of that as well, or even all of Amazon saw a 2% decrease in revenue. I think we'll probably have to see what Amazon earnings come out to get a true number on that. But I think it gives us directionally the impacts that we might have, or some of the trends that we might have seen during that time
Yeah,
period.
the question was whether those metrics or for the overall seller landscape or just Amazon. What we shown was primarily for Amazon.
Awesome. So the last takeaway here on this report that I wanted to touch on is just how we would go about using this. The biggest impact again is seeing like what is the impact specifically of non-event period spend, right? So if I see that, my purchase rate or my return on ad spend goes up by 25, 30, 50%, which is real impacts that we've seen it have in the past when I start to introduce lead-in spend to a customer's journey. That kind of helps justify or help you make decisions about how much of that spend should be allocated prior to the event before you even get into those main days of BFCM when you're going to experience lower costs, people starting to add items to their carts and things like that. It also lets you know how many users you have that have seen your ads multiple times in these periods, but maybe haven't yet purchased, which will be relevant as we start to get to some of those audience executions as well. All right. So the next one that we want to touch on is a query called new to brand customers, but we want to focus on one specific element here, which is viewing on a campaign level. And this is relevant across both sponsored ads and DSP, but on a campaign level, what is the rate of new to brand that I'm driving? Your goal, typically at least with running deals during these events, around BFCM, is to try to drive new customer acquisition. And so one of the things we want to make sure that we're doing is when we're running these deals and running our ads around them, we're not just reacquiring customers we've had in the past, unless we're have campaigns with the goal of driving subscribe and save, for an example. So this query is going to allow us to see on an individual campaign level, and we could pull this just for the BFCM period. How many total new to brand sales did I get? And then what was the percentage of sales that were new to brand? So these are going to be the customer's first purchase over the last 12 months. unless, of course, you have that 5 year look back data set, which would then allow us to do that analysis over a little bit of a longer time frame, up to 5 years potentially. So then this again is going to help us determine as we go into future events, even the holiday season, if you're continuing to run deals over the next couple of weeks, which campaigns should we push more ad dollars to, right? Maybe campaign A saw a higher return on ad spend than campaign B, but campaign B had a 70% new to brand percentage versus campaign A had a 40%, right? And that might, based off of your goals, change where you want to allocate some of those dollars. Moving on, I want to touch on first touch attribution. So I think one of the biggest questions that we hear during these event periods, or any period where we see an increase in spend, is what is the incremental dollars that I'm getting specifically from more upper funnel tactics, right? We often see, especially in the lead up to these events, that more and more brands are putting dollars into streaming TV, online video on DSP, sponsored display, even non-branded ads on sponsored ads. And what is the effect that those are having past just someone clicks and buys from that ad set? And so first touch attribution is a great way to get an understanding of the effect of those dollars. Most of you are probably aware Amazon's default model works off of a last touch attribution. So everything that you're seeing in the console is going to attribute 100% of the sale to someone's last interaction with an ad. Versus with this model, we can flip that on its head and say every sale that comes from a customer's journey is attributed to the first ad that they were exposed to within their shopper journey. Right. So that's going to allow us to say how many customers were introduced to my brand for the first time by a video ad that I ran, and then what were the dollars that eventually came from those customers. Which, again, still not going to say 100% of those users would not have purchased if we didn't run that ad, but it starts to give us a good idea into the lift that are provided, especially by more upper funnel ads, as we start to do some reviews from those consideration and awareness strategies.
One thing I'll add is I think looking at first touch and last touch next to each other will unlock some new insight. What I would focus on there is, where is the story different? Is there a DSP campaign that gets little to no credit in your last touch view, which, by the way, is at the top of the list on your first touch? So I think putting those two views next to each other could also, finding the differences is a new unlock in terms of insight that you typically wouldn't have, because everything is last touch attributed.
And I want to kind of touch on, I call this a bonus because it may not be an analysis that we would do right away, but it's probably up there with like the tentpole overlap as to one of the top recommendations we would have as terms of doing an analysis outside of this event. And that's really diving into what is the lifetime value of these customers past this initial purchase. Again, most brands are focused on that new customer acquisition around this time frame, but that goes past just seeing how many of your customers that bought from you during an event like this are new to brand, but also seeing what is their continued results for you as a customer. If they're just coming in, spending the money buying on a deal, but then they never purchase from your brand again, they don't become true branded customers, especially if you're in a higher repeat purchase category like a CPG brand. We're not going to necessarily count that customer the same as someone that we might have acquired outside of an event period that had a stronger conversion over time. And so looking at our lifetime value over, a 3 month span, a 6 month span, a 1 year span, and even with the 5 year look back data that, Amazon makes available up to a 3 or a 5 year span, we can really start to understand the effect that running these deals has on us acquiring customers over the long term. So our recommendation for the immediate step is to make sure you have a strong list of what ASINs you had promos on during this BFCM period. And then as we get to the end of Q1, the end of Q2, over the next year, start running lifetime value queries to see how are those customers that specifically bought those deal ASINs during this promotional period, how are they continuing to interact with your brand? And if you see that they have just as strong of a conversion rate as your other customers who buy from you in a regular period, and they're not just deal hunting, that could help justify increased spend or increased interaction with those customers during future events. Or the opposite, you might see that they don't purchase from you again, and that might indicate that you want to pull back some in future events as well. So really important to try to track those customers over time. A question we got, how do we target these customers is that through AMC audiences? That's a great question. Something that we'll touch on in a slide or two. But yes, we could create an audience of everybody who bought from your either anybody who bought from the brand as a whole or who bought from specific sets of ASINs during the event. And you could use that across DSP and sponsored ads to retarget those customers in the future to try to drive those secondary sales here.
So, just a couple more call outs. We just got off a call with a brand that is super interested in understanding certainly what will happen to shoppers that were acquired with deals during this Black Friday and Cyber Monday. But if you had a clean list of ASINs that were on deals the previous Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or the year before, we can literally help you take that cohort of customers you have acquired and actually see what they have done. And ultimately, like what this will help you understand is like, are you choosing the right ASINs for deals at all? And is there any strategic benefit of doing so? So very valuable. This is all this is possible now because of the 5-year look back data set. But highly recommend that like you build a muscle around this data set, especially if you're a 1P brand.
Another comment we got, deal customers usually have the worst LTV seasonality of a customer is huge in LTV. I think it's a great call up, and why we recommend doing this type of analysis is because we do often see that customers acquired via a deal have a lower long-term value. And so doing this analysis can help determine how much investment do we want to put in acquiring those customers, depending on the type of brand that you are. If a lot of your value from a customer comes in the second, third, fourth purchase, and these deals customers aren't getting to that point, then that either opens up the door of we want to go back and push more on retargeting those users, or maybe we don't push as much on running heavy promos on certain ASINs that those repeat purchases are a priority for us. So really having an understanding of what that data set is for your brand can help drive which direction you want to go forward in terms of promotions in the future.
One other thing I want to add. So there was a question about how can we create audiences? Again, what is now possible is because you have 5 years of look back, you can create cohorts of audiences that are buying a lot from you, or cohorts of audiences that just bought once, or cohorts of audiences that have just churned, right? So they've been buying your brand for the last 3 years and they just dropped off. So those are all the cohorts of audiences that can be created and targeted.
And I would just add to that, a lot of those use that 5-year look back, which we know is a paid data set. But when we're working with audiences, Amazon offers that data set for free. So if you're wanting
Good
to
point.
create one of those, but you don't want to pay for the data set every month, you can do that without any added cost.
Well, and in terms of cost, it's a 60-day free trial, and after that, it's $500 a month. Just FYI.
Perfect. So I want to quickly, on that note, touch on a couple audiences that offer some immediate value and usability as we move into the rest of December and then into Q1. I'm actually going to do these in the reverse order that we have them here on this slide. I would actually immediately turn your focus to people who viewed your ads during Prime Day periods, but didn't end up purchasing from you. Right, so that's an AMC audience that I can create anybody who viewed my product page during this time frame, and I can then, if I'm running DSP, go run a retargeting ad against them. If I'm only running sponsored ads, I could target them in sponsored display, or I could bid boost against those users in my non-branded ads, for an example. Right, so if these customers viewed my product page, didn't buy, and are now searching again against my non-branded keywords, I might want to bid more for those users to try to bring them back into my shopping funnel. And so if you're still running promotions over these next 2 weeks leading up to the holidays, that's a great way to bring these customers back that you spent those dollars against during Black Friday to try to get them to take that final step and drive a purchase. If you want to get more targeted, you would also look at this instead of just people who viewed a product page, look at people who added your product to a cart, added your product to list. Those are all signals that we would get through AMC that you could then work with audiences against.
Yeah, I think the key here is whatever you think is a signal for a high intent, right?
Yeah,
You can, I mean, this is perhaps the highest intent, someone actually coming to your PDP and seeing the product. But you could also have shoppers who have searched very highly relevant keywords but never
yep.
clicked on your ad, right? So there's a full spectrum of what you might think of high intent for a particular client or the brand you are with, and create all those audiences and go back and chase them again. in the holiday period.
Yeah, you could even do something, like someone who saw an ad but never clicked on it, right? Like that entire cohort. So there's lots of different levers we can look at there. But definitely a lot of those customers probably are still looking to make a purchase over the next couple of weeks. So we want to make sure that we take advantage of that expanded audience pool while we can.
There's a question from the audience about what are the thoughts on targeting the lookalikes of audiences who purchased. It gets larger in size and kind of broad. Yes, lookalikes. There's about when you create lookalike audiences, there is 5 different types of lookalike audiences you can create, all the way from very narrow to very broad. But even the narrowest segment gets you about 500,000 people. My suggestion around lookalikes is it all depends on what the starting size of your starting point audience is. If it's too small, lookalikes is your only way to expand that. When we say too small today, AMC allows you to go create an audience if you have 2,000 people, right, in a particular definition of a cohort. But 2,000 is too tiny. You will see nothing out of 2,000. So generally, our recommendation is unless it's 10,000 or more, you're not going to see even a blip. So if you have situations where you have a much smaller pool, for example, I think people who have interacted with your reviews content would be an example where those tend to be smaller. That's a scenario where I think it's worthwhile testing the lookalike audience. So again, if you have a small base, lookalikes is where I would go. But ultimately, there's no guarantee. Honestly, with any of these ideas, these are all ideas that you want to cycle through and explore. Will it work for you? Not sure. But my suggestion would be to create lookalikes where the base audience is really small.
And I would caveat that with any lookalike is going to be more of a prospecting, but maybe more targeted prospecting than going after the whole category, right? Thinking about something like someone who viewed my product page, added to cart, even someone who just saw an ad, that user specifically has or potentially has some level of brand recall when they're going to be exposed to another ad from you. So you're going to see a lift against those. Versus a lookalike audience, we're just saying that we would expect to have a higher propensity for these users to have an interest in our brand than the larger category. But you're specifically with the individuals that you're exposing to as and part of a lookalike don't have necessarily previous ad exposure or product page exposure themselves. So it's not going to be the same sales impact typically in a more immediate sense as like the base audience itself might be. And then quickly on the other example that we have here, this is one way that we touched on that LTV slide, but looking at customers who purchased during BFCM and looking to turn them into repeat purchasers. This is probably not something we would run during December unless you have a product that has a really quick repeat purchase cycle. But as I get into Q1, Q2, and start getting to those 30, 60-day look backs where I might have customers that are looking to repurchase, this is a great way to turn those deal focused shoppers into true brand customers that are buying from you every month, every 90 days, whatever that ideal cycle for your brand might be. So as you start to get to those windows, which we can also use AMC to find what that window is, creating an audience of everybody who bought during the FCM and retargeting them during that period is a great way to start to bring them back and expose them again to your brand as they might be thinking about making another purchase in your category. And I would say that's not necessarily limited to BFCM, right? This is something that can be used at any point in time as you have larger sets of customer acquisition and want to turn them into longer term customers. But BFCM is a great way to start working through that as we have a larger set of newly acquired customers. And we know that they might have a lower rate of becoming true brand customers over a longer term because they bought initially from a promotion.
One thing I will say, again, the 5 year look back data set will be helpful. Certainly for your hero ASINs, it'll be helpful to understand what is that time to the second and the third purchase. And so again, it's you can run a couple of queries to understand that now that you couldn't do before. Could be very valuable in determining when you want to go back and target them again.
Well, that's most of what we wanted to walk through today. I'll just wrap this up by saying, if you're want to start executing some of these queries or start executing these audiences and you don't really know how, we're here to help you. Intentwise platform around AMC called Intentwise Explore is designed to do exactly that. So every query or audience that you saw today is something that's pre-built into our platform and you can execute without any SQL knowledge today. If you're wanting to start executing these, but aren't sure how, I'm going to launch a poll here in the Zoom. So all you need to do there is answer yes on this poll that I'm launching, and someone from our team will reach out to help you get a demo or set up with our AMC solution if you're not someone who's currently using it.
And while we do that, please drop in your questions and we're happy to take them.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I think we can end there. But I appreciate you all again jumping on. Hope everyone has a great rest of the holiday season. And please feel free again to reach out with any questions you might have. Thanks, everyone.